This is the story of an empire that shaped your language, your laws, your calendar, and you probably never noticed. This is Forming Knowledge Quietly. This video presents the Roman Empire through slow, unhurried storytelling. Let it run while you rest, while you cook, while you wind down at the end of a long day. There's nothing to focus on, nothing to memorize. Just let the stories come. Close your eyes if you want. The knowledge will find you. Start with a river. A muddy, slow-moving river in the middle of central Italy, the Tiber. It is around 750 years before the birth of Christ, and on the banks of that river, among 7 low hills, something is beginning that the world will not see the end of for over 1,000 years. Perhaps longer, depending on how you measure endings. That something is Rome. The Romans themselves told the founding like a fairy tale. Twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, born of the war god Mars, and a Vestal virgin named Rhea Silvia. A jealous uncle who feared their power threw them into a basket and sent them down the Tiber to die. But they didn't die. They were found by a she-wolf who nursed them. A shepherd and his wife raised them, and when the brothers grew up, they decided to build a city on the very hills where they had been saved. The 2 brothers quarreled over which hill the city should be founded on, and in that quarrel, according to legend, Romulus killed Remus. A city built on fratricidal blood. Perhaps that tells you something about what Rome would become. The traditional founding date is 753 BC. Scholars debate exactly what was happening in the hills of Italy at that moment, but archaeological evidence confirms that something significant was already stirring around 625 BC. Settlements merging, people organizing, a city beginning to take shape. Whatever its precise birth, Rome grew. And it never really stopped growing. The first phase of Roman history is called the period of kings. For just over 2 centuries, Rome was ruled by monarchs, 7 of them, including several of Etruscan origin, from the powerful civilization that dominated northern Italy at the time. These kings were not merely figureheads. They built the first roads, the first temples, the first version of the Senate. They gave Rome its early bones. But in 509 BC, the Romans did something unusual. They threw their kings out. The last Roman king, Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, was ousted in a revolution after his son committed an act of violence against a noblewoman named Lucretia. It was a moral outrage that broke something in the Roman soul. From that moment on, the Romans had a deep, almost visceral hatred of the idea of a single person holding absolute power. The word for king, rex, became something close to a curse. What replaced the kings was the Roman Republic, a system of government so clever, so layered, so paranoid about concentrated power that historians still study it today. 2 consuls were elected every single year, each with the power to veto the other. A senate of experienced patricians guided policy. A series of other offices, tribunes, praetors, censors, quaestors, distributed power across dozens of hands. No one person could hold too much for too long. It was flawed. The patricians, the old noble families, held enormous advantages over the plebeians, the common people. The struggle between these 2 classes, a slow, grinding conflict called the conflict of the orders, shaped Roman politics for centuries. But there was something in the structure itself, something that encouraged discussion, negotiation, and compromise that made Rome unusual in the ancient world. And it made Rome powerful in ways nobody could have predicted. By 264 BC, Rome controlled the entire Italian peninsula. It had built alliances, fought wars, incorporated defeated peoples into its expanding body. It extended Roman citizenship to those who submitted, and that offer of belonging, of becoming Roman, of joining something larger than yourself, was one of the most powerful weapons Rome possessed. Then came the Punic Wars. 3 great conflicts against Carthage, the North African trading empire. The second of these wars brought the most terrifying moment in Roman history, and the moment that perhaps forged Roman identity more deeply than any other. A Carthaginian general named Hannibal crossed the Alps in 218 BC, with an army and with war elephants descending on Italy from the north in a direction no one expected. He spent 15 years on Italian soil, inflicting devastating defeats. At the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC, he surrounded and destroyed a Roman army of roughly 70,000 men in a single afternoon. One of the worst military disasters in history. Rome was shaken to its foundations. But Rome did not surrender. They kept raising armies. They kept fighting. They held the line through a loss that would have ended most civilizations. And eventually, they sent their own general, Scipio Africanus, to strike at Carthage itself. Hannibal was recalled from Italy to defend his home and was defeated at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC. The Second Punic War ended. Rome survived. The historian Livy later wrote that Hannibal had turned all of Italy upside down, and yet Rome had endured. It was that quality, that refusal to accept defeat, that terrifying persistence, which more than anything else explains how a city on 7 hills came to rule the known world. By 146 BC, both Carthage and Greece had been absorbed. Rome's borders now stretched across the Mediterranean. The wealth poured in, the slaves poured in, and something began to shift. There is something deeply worth sitting with here. Rome didn't just conquer by force, it conquered by offering a deal. And the deal was this: accept Roman law, pay your taxes, honor your obligations, and you can keep your customs, your gods, your local ways of life. You can even become Roman. It was, in the ancient world, a genuinely unusual arrangement. Most empires of that era demanded total cultural submission. Rome demanded administrative submission, but allowed a great deal else to breathe. That flexibility, that pragmatic tolerance, is a large part of why the empire lasted as long as it did. But back to the Republic, because before Rome became an empire, it had to destroy itself first. The wealth from conquest created a crisis. Rich senators bought up vast tracts of land, worked by slaves imported from conquered territories. Small farmers, the backbone of Roman society, the men who fought in the legions, were pushed off their land. They drifted to the cities, particularly to Rome itself. The city swelled, poverty swelled with it. Reformers tried to fix it. Tiberius Gracchus proposed land reforms in 133 BC and was murdered for it. His brother Gaius tried again in 123 BC and was killed too. The Senate, which had managed the Republic so effectively for so long, was becoming something else, a vehicle for the interests of the very wealthy. And the army was changing too. The general Gaius Marius reformed the Roman military around 107 BC, opening the legions to landless men, men who owned nothing. Where before a soldier's loyalty was ultimately to Rome, now it shifted toward the general who paid him, who promised him land at the end of his service. The legions became the personal instruments of their commanders. And the commanders began to look at each other with calculating eyes. The result was civil war. Marius against Sulla. Then Pompey, Caesar, and Crassus forming the first triumvirate. Then Caesar against the Senate. Then, after Caesar, another civil war. Rome tore at itself for nearly 100 years. Hundreds of senators were killed. Armies marched on the city. The old order that had managed half a millennium of republican governance crumbled into rubble and blood. Julius Caesar. Even now, 2,000 years later, the name carries weight. Born in 100 BC into a patrician family that was at the time not especially prominent, Caesar turned himself into one of the most consequential human beings who ever lived. He was a military genius. He was an orator of remarkable skill. He was a writer. His account of the Gallic Wars is still read today. He was a politician of breathtaking audacity. Between 58 and 50 BC, Caesar conquered Gaul, the territory roughly equivalent to modern France, Belgium, and parts of Switzerland and Germany. He fought more than 30 battles. He built bridges across the Rhine. He even crossed the Channel to Britain twice. The first Roman general to set foot on that distant island. He was, by any measure, extraordinary, and he was also dangerous. The Senate saw what he was becoming. In 49 BC, they ordered him to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar refused. He crossed the Rubicon, a small river in northern Italy that was the legal boundary between his province and Italy proper, with his legions. To cross that river with an army was an act of war against the state. Caesar knew it. He crossed anyway. The phrase crossing the Rubicon has never lost its meaning. After years of civil war, Caesar emerged triumphant. He pardoned his enemies, embarked on sweeping reforms, created the Julian calendar, redistributed land, expanded the Senate, and began transforming Rome in ways that left the old guard gasping. He was declared dictator perpetuo, dictator for life, in early 44 BC. That was too much for some. On the 15th of March, 44 BC, the Ides of March, Julius Caesar walked into the theatre of Pompey for a meeting of the Senate. He had been warned. His wife Calpurnia had dreamed of disaster and begged him not to go. A seer had told him to beware the Ides of March. He dismissed these warnings. Waiting for him were approximately 60 conspirators, senators who called themselves the Liberators. They believed they were saving the Republic. Led by Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, they surrounded Caesar and stabbed him 23 times. He died at the base of a statue of Pompey, his old rival. His body was burned in a great pyre in the Forum. A comet appeared in the sky shortly after his death. The Romans believed it was Caesar ascending to the gods. The liberators had expected gratitude. Instead, they got chaos. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general, gave a speech at the funeral that turned the people of Rome against the assassins. Mob violence erupted. The conspirators fled. Another round of civil war began, bloodier than what had come before. When it ended, there was only one man left standing. His name was Octavian. He was 18 years old when Caesar was killed, Caesar's great-nephew and adopted son. He was thin, frequently ill, not obviously a warrior. He seemed at first glance like an unlikely heir to the most powerful man in the Roman world. He was not. Through a combination of cold intelligence, political genius, and ruthlessness deployed with surgical precision, Octavian outmaneuvered everyone. He formed the second triumvirate with Mark Antony and Lepidus. He and Antony hunted down and destroyed the forces of Brutus and Cassius at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC. Then the alliance between Octavian and Antony itself collapsed. Antony had gone east, fallen in with the Egyptian queen Cleopatra, and drifted away from Rome in ways both political and personal. In 31 BC, at the Battle of Actium off the western coast of Greece, Octavian's fleet destroyed the combined forces of Antony and Cleopatra. Both fled to Egypt. Both killed themselves within the year. Octavian was 32 years old. He controlled the entire Roman world. What he did next was perhaps his greatest achievement. He could have declared himself king, but he knew what had happened to Caesar when power became too visible. Instead, he performed a masterful act of political theatre. He appeared before the Senate and dramatically offered to give back all his powers. The Senate, understanding the game, refused and heaped new honors on him instead. He was given the name Augustus, meaning the Exalted One, and the title Princeps, first citizen, first among equals. He was, in all but name, an emperor, but he never said the word. Augustus reigned for 44 years, from 27 BC to 14 AD. He was the first emperor, the longest reigning ruler in Roman history, and the man who shaped everything that followed. He transformed Rome from a city of bricks, in his own words, into a city of marble. He built 50,000 miles of roads under his watch alone. He created a permanent professional army with guaranteed pensions from the public treasury, ending the dangerous loyalty of soldiers to their individual generals. He reformed the tax system, the courts, the administration of the provinces. He established a permanent fire brigade and police force for the city of Rome, and he brought peace. After a century of civil war, the Mediterranean world breathed out. The gates of the Temple of Janus, which were opened in times of war, were closed 3 times during his reign. The poets Virgil, Horace, Ovid, and the historian Livy flourished in what became known as the Augustan Age. It was a golden time, fragile and complicated, purchased at the price of political freedom, but undeniably golden. On his deathbed, Augustus reportedly asked those around him, "Have I played the part well? Then applaud as I exit." He had played it extraordinarily well. The period that began with Augustus is called the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. It lasted roughly from 27 BC to 180 AD, approximately 200 years. During this time, the Roman Empire's population is estimated to have reached around 70 million people, roughly a third of the world's entire population at the time. Trade flourished, cities grew, the empire doubled in size to stretch from the shores of Scotland to the deserts of Mesopotamia. It was not entirely peaceful. There were revolts in Judea, wars on the Germanic frontier, the great eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD that buried Pompeii under ash, and emperors ranging from the brilliant to the catastrophically unhinged. But compared to what came before and what would come after, these 2 centuries were something close to a golden age. The 5 good emperors, as historians have called them, ruled successively from 96 to 180 AD. Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. Each chose their successor not by blood, but by adoption, selecting the most capable man available. Under Trajan, the empire reached its greatest extent, stretching across 3 continents. Under Hadrian, it was consolidated and ordered, its frontiers reinforced, including the famous wall across northern Britain. Under Marcus Aurelius, soldier-philosopher, Stoic thinker, a man who wrote meditations on how to live while managing an empire under constant pressure, Rome reached something close to its noblest expression of itself. But let's stop for a moment and look inside. What was it actually like to live in Rome? Imagine standing in the city of Rome at the height of the empire, around 100 AD. The population is somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million people. No other city in the Western world will reach that size again for over 1,000 years. It is noisy. It is dense. It smells. Carts are not allowed in the city during daylight hours to manage the traffic, which means they run at night, and the noise is relentless. Most people in Rome live in insulae, apartment blocks, sometimes 5 or 6 stories tall, packed closely together. The upper floors are cheapest and most dangerous. Fire is a constant risk, and Rome's fire brigades work constantly. The lower floors are for those who can afford the luxury of not being carried out in a fire. Before sunrise, the streets are already humming. The poet Martial complained that he was woken before dawn by the sound of schoolmasters beginning their lessons, bakers heating their ovens, and coppersmiths hammering. The city never fully sleeps. Most Romans worked a 6-hour day, beginning at dawn and ending around noon. Artisans in their small shops, merchants in the forum, lawyers in the courts, slaves in the homes of the wealthy, all of them moving through the city in the blue light of early morning. The forum itself is the heart of everything: market, political assembly, temple precinct, meeting place. Life rotates around it like water around a drain. By midday, work stops and the city shifts toward leisure. The afternoon belongs to the baths. The Roman baths, the thermae, are not merely places to wash. They are the social hubs of the empire. In the great public baths of Rome, you move through a sequence of rooms, from the warm caldarium, steamed and slicked with oil, to the tepidarium where an attendant scrapes the oil, grime and sweat from your skin with a curved metal tool called a strygil, to the cold frigidarium, where you plunge into water cold enough to shock the breath from your lungs. The baths built by Emperor Diocletian covered 32 acres, contained gardens, fountains, a running track, and could accommodate 3,000 people at once. Admission was cheap, sometimes free. Rich and poor moved through the same steam. After the baths, there might be a trip to the theatre, or the Circus Maximus for chariot racing, a venue that held up to 250,000 spectators, a number that dwarfs any sports stadium in the world today. Or the Colosseum, which opened in 80 AD and could seat around 50,000 people, where the program included gladiatorial fights, wild animal hunts with beasts imported from Africa and Asia, and on rare occasions, naval battles staged in a flooded arena. The Romans called it panem et circenses, bread and circuses. The government understood that keeping people fed and entertained was the price of political stability. Grain was distributed free or at subsidized prices to much of the Roman population. Entertainment was constant and elaborate. A city of 1 million people, entertained, fed, and kept too busy to revolt. For the wealthy, the evening meal was the centerpiece of the day. Long, elaborate, served on reclining couches in the triclinium, the dining room, with dishes ranging from the familiar, bread, olives, fish, roasted meat, to the genuinely strange by modern standards. Wealthy Romans ate flamingo, dormice fattened with chestnuts, sea urchins, sows' wombs, and honeyed wine seasoned with spices from the farthest edges of the empire. Between courses, musicians played, poets recited, acrobats performed. For the poor, supper was bread, olive oil, a little fish if they were lucky, and a cup of posca, vinegar mixed with water. It was the drink of soldiers and labourers. It was sustaining. It was not glamorous. 90% of the Roman Empire's population were peasant farmers, living lives that the historian Chester Starr described as grim, short, and abysmally poverty-stricken. The extraordinary monuments, the gleaming marble, the philosophical emperors, these were the experience of a tiny fraction of people. Most Romans lived and died in quiet, hungry obscurity, their names never recorded anywhere at all. And running through all of it, holding the empire together, was the army. The Roman legions are one of history's most remarkable military inventions. At the height of the empire, Rome maintained approximately 30 legions across its vast territories. Each legion contained roughly 5,000 to 5,500 men, divided into 10 cohorts, each cohort into 6 centuries of 80 men, each century led by a centurion. The centurion was the spine of the army, not an aristocrat, but a career soldier promoted through merit, tough and experienced, carrying a vine staff as the symbol of his authority to flog his men. Every legionary carried the same equipment: a large rectangular shield, a short stabbing sword called the gladius, 2 heavy javelins called pila, body armor, a helmet, and the tools to build a camp every single night on the march. A Roman soldier didn't just fight. He dug ditches, built roads, constructed aqueducts, erected fortifications. The army was an engineering corps as much as a fighting force. The tactics of the legion were elegant and devastating. Before engaging in close combat, the front ranks would hurl their pila, javelins designed so that the shaft bent on impact, making them impossible to remove from a shield and too heavy to throw back. The enemy line, suddenly burdened with useless shields, was hit by a disciplined wall of men advancing behind their own shields, stabbing with short swords at close quarters. The shock of the initial volley, followed by the controlled fury of the charge, broke most opponents before they had time to recover. In difficult terrain, the legionaries could lock their shields overhead and at the sides in a formation called the testudo, the tortoise, creating a protected box that allowed them to advance under arrow fire or walk up to the walls of a city under siege. Roman siege engineering was some of the most sophisticated in the ancient world. They built towers, rams, catapults, and entire siege works around cities with a speed and precision that astonished their enemies. One of the most famous examples was the Siege of Masada in 73 AD, where Roman forces besieging a Jewish fortress in the Judean desert simply built an enormous earthen ramp up the side of the mountain. It took months. It worked. The loyalty of a legionary was reinforced in every way the Romans could devise. Soldiers swore a sacred oath, the sacramentum, to their emperor and the standards of their legion. The eagle, the aquila, was the sacred symbol of each legion carried by the aquilifer, and if an eagle was lost in battle, the disgrace was total. 3 legions lost their eagles in the catastrophic ambush of the Teutoburg forest in 9 AD. When Germanic tribes led by a chieftain named Arminius destroyed 3 legions, some 20,000 men, in a forest ambush, and the memory of that loss haunted Augustus for the rest of his life. He was said to bang his head against the walls of his palace and shout, "Varus, give me back my legions!" The eagles were never fully recovered. Behind the legions, and woven into everything the Romans built, was engineering of a scale and sophistication that still commands something close to awe. Consider the roads first. By 200 AD, Rome had constructed more than 50,000 miles of paved roads across its empire, with a total road network, including unpaved tracks, of something closer to 250,000 miles. They were not merely paths, they were engineering achievements, built in layers. A deep foundation of large stones, then gravel for drainage, then smaller stones bound with concrete, then a final surface of fitted stone slabs tilted slightly to the sides to let rainwater run off. Many of these roads were so well built that sections of them survive today, and some modern European roads still follow the routes the Romans laid. The phrase, "all roads lead to Rome," was quite literally true. The empire's road network radiated outward from the city like the spokes of a wheel. A soldier could march 25 miles a day on these roads. Merchants could move goods reliably across thousands of miles. The speed of communication and movement that Roman roads enabled was not matched in Europe until the age of railways. Then there were the aqueducts. Rome's first aqueduct, the Aqua Appia, was built in 312 BC. By the height of the empire, 11 separate aqueducts served the city of Rome alone, bringing in approximately 300 million gallons of fresh water every single day. Per capita, ancient Rome used about as much water as modern New York City. The aqueducts worked purely through gravity. No pumps, no engines. Roman engineers surveyed the terrain with extraordinary precision, calculating gradients so slight that the water dropped only an inch for every few hundred feet of channel, flowing smoothly for distances of up to 60 miles. Where valleys interrupted the route, they built arcaded bridges, the great soaring arches of the Pont du Gard in southern France. Still standing today, still visibly beautiful after 2,000 years. Where hills blocked the way, they tunneled through. The water that arrived was distributed to public fountains, to the public baths, and, for the wealthy, to private homes. The poor fetched their water from the fountains. There was no shortage. The fountains ran continuously, day and night. Roman concrete, opus caementicum, is one of the great secrets of ancient engineering. Made from volcanic ash, lime, and seawater, it could set even underwater and grew stronger over time rather than weaker. The dome of the Pantheon in Rome, built around 125 AD under Emperor Hadrian, is 43 meters in diameter and remains to this day the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world. It has stood for nearly 1,900 years, still intact, still in use as a place of worship. Modern engineers study it with genuine admiration. All of this engineering served a purpose beyond utility. When Rome built roads and aqueducts and amphitheaters in newly conquered territories, it was sending a message. It was saying, this is what Rome offers. Clean water, straight roads, spectacular entertainment, legal order. Become Roman, and this is yours. It was, as one historian described it, a bribe, and it worked. But empires, even extraordinary ones, do not last forever. The trouble began, as it so often does, quietly, and then all at once. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, the last of the 5 good emperors, died in 180 AD. He broke with the practice of his predecessors by leaving the throne to his biological son, Commodus. It was a catastrophic decision. Commodus was vain, violent, delusional. He believed himself to be the reincarnation of Hercules and fought in the gladiatorial arena in a leopard skin. His reign ended, as many Roman reigns ended, in assassination in 192 AD. What followed was called the crisis of the 3rd century, and it was exactly what it sounds like. Between 235 and 284 AD, over 50 emperors ruled Rome, or tried to. Most lasted only months. Most died violently. The Praetorian Guard, the emperor's personal bodyguard, had long been in the habit of making and breaking emperors. On one occasion, they openly auctioned the throne to the highest bidder. While emperors murdered each other in Rome, the frontiers were under simultaneous attack. Germanic tribes, the Goths, the Alemanni, the Franks, pushed across the Rhine and Danube from the north. A newly resurgent Persian empire, the Sassanids, pressed from the east. In 260 AD, the Emperor Valerian was captured by the Persian king Shapur I, the first and only Roman emperor ever taken prisoner by a foreign enemy. He died in captivity. The humiliation was depicted on Persian rock carvings for centuries. The empire briefly split into three competing polities. Plague swept through the cities, killing enormous percentages of the population. The plague of Cyprian, which devastated the empire between 249 and 262 AD, allegedly killed 5,000 people a day in Rome at its height. Trade networks collapsed, currency was debased, hyperinflation set in, farms went uncultivated. Rome survived the crisis of the 3rd century, just barely. The Illyrian emperors, tough soldier rulers from the Balkans, stabilized the frontiers and restored some order. Diocletian, who came to power in 284 AD, implemented sweeping reforms and divided the empire in two, a western half and an eastern half, for more efficient governance. Constantine the Great, who ruled from 306 to 337 AD, moved the capital eastward to a new city on the Bosporus called Constantinople, the city that is today Istanbul, and did something that changed the history of the world. He converted to Christianity and made it the favored religion of the empire. The reasons for Constantine's conversion are debated. He claimed to have seen a vision of a Christian symbol before the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 312 AD. Whether the vision was real, metaphorical, or a piece of political theatre, the consequences were enormous. By 380 AD, Christianity was the official state religion of the Roman Empire. A faith that had been persecuted, fed to lions in the Colosseum, burned in Nero's gardens, was now imperial. And here is one of history's great ironies. The Roman Empire eventually fell, but the institution it had created to govern its Christian populations, the Church of Rome, the Catholic Church, survived. The Pope inherited the title once held by Julius Caesar himself, Pontifex Maximus, the highest priest. The administrative structure of the empire became the administrative structure of medieval Christendom. Latin, the language of Rome, became the language of European scholarship and the Church for 1,000 years after Rome's fall. The empire died. Its shadow never did. The Western Roman Empire's end came in layers, like paint peeling slowly from a wall. By the late 4th century, the pressure on the frontiers was becoming intolerable. The Huns, a nomadic people of extraordinary military skill from the Eurasian steppe, swept westward into Europe around 375 AD, driving Germanic tribes before them like a wave drives water. The Visigoths, fleeing the Huns, begged to be allowed to settle inside Roman territory. Rome agreed on conditions, but Roman officials exploited the refugees brutally, charging extortionate prices for food, selling them dog meat, allegedly enslaving their children. The Visigoths rose in revolt. In 378 AD, at the Battle of Adrianople, the Visigoths destroyed a Roman army and killed the Eastern Emperor Valens. It was a catastrophic defeat, the kind that would once have been recovered from through that famous Roman persistence. But the empire of 378 was not the empire of 216 BC. The reserves of manpower, money, and political will were not what they had been. The following decades were a cascade. Britain was abandoned around 410 AD. The troops withdrawn for the endless emergency elsewhere. North Africa fell to the Vandals by 430. In 410 AD, the Visigoth king Alaric sacked Rome itself, the first time the city had been plundered in 800 years. The shock was so profound that the Christian theologian Augustine began writing his great work, The City of God, partly in response to it, arguing that Rome's fall was not a divine punishment, not the end of the world, but simply the passing of one human city among many. Then came Attila the Hun. Between 440 and 453 AD, Attila led his forces in devastating raids across Gaul and into Italy. He stood at the gates of Rome itself. Whether it was diplomacy, disease in his army, or simple strategic calculation, he withdrew without sacking the city. But the damage to the empire's prestige and resources was immense. By 476 AD, the Western Roman emperor was a teenage boy named Romulus Augustulus. A poignant name combining the names of Rome's legendary founder and its greatest emperor, given to a child who was essentially a puppet of his father. On September 4th, 476 AD, a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer deposed him. He did not even bother declaring himself emperor. He simply sent the imperial regalia, the robes, the crown, the symbols of office, to Constantinople, to the Eastern emperor, and informed him that the West no longer needed an emperor of its own. It was almost anticlimactic, not a dramatic last stand, not a great battle, not a roaring fire, just a quiet administrative act, a teenager sent into comfortable exile, a letter sent east. The curtain came down on the Western Roman Empire with something close to a shrug. And there is a certain dark poetry in the fact that Rome began with Romulus and ended with Romulus, that the first name and the last name of the empire were the same. History sometimes has that quality, a kind of story logic that feels too neat to be coincidental. But was it really the end? The Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire as historians call it, continued for another 1,000 years. Constantinople held out against Persians, Arabs, Bulgars, Crusaders, and more, until 1453 AD, when the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II finally broke through the city's walls. Even then, Mehmed called himself Caesar of Rome. The title never fully died, and the legacy that Rome left behind was so profound, so woven into the fabric of the world, that the question of whether Rome ever truly fell becomes genuinely complicated. The Romance languages, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian, are directly descended from Latin. Roughly 800 million people speak a Romance language today. English, which is not a Romance language, nevertheless has thousands of Latin roots woven through its vocabulary. The words you use to describe law, justice, government, medicine, science, architecture, enormous numbers of them, are Roman. The legal ideas that underpin most modern Western legal systems, the presumption of innocence, the right to a hearing, the concept of legal personhood, contracts, property rights, written codes of law, all developed in Rome. The Justinian Code, compiled in Constantinople in 529 AD, became the foundation of civil law across Europe. The American Senate is named after the Roman Senate. The American system of 3 branches of government, executive, legislative, judicial, was consciously modeled on the structure of the Roman Republic. Even the United States Capitol building echoes Roman architecture in its dome, its columns, its proportions. The Gregorian calendar that governs modern life is a refinement of the Julian calendar, introduced by Julius Caesar in 46 BC. The months of July and August are named after Julius Caesar and Augustus, respectively. Wednesday through to Saturday carry the names of Roman gods translated into Germanic equivalents. The Catholic Church preserved Roman administrative structures, Latin, Roman law, and Roman architectural forms through the medieval period and beyond. The Pope, seated in the city of Rome, still bears the title that the Romans created for their highest priest. Roman roads, some of them laid 2,000 years ago, still underlie European highways. Roman aqueduct channels still carry water to fountains in Rome today. The Pantheon's dome still stands. And perhaps most strikingly, the concept of civilization itself, the idea that cities, laws, roads, shared language, and ordered government are the marks of a properly organized human community, is, in the Western tradition, a Roman idea. The word civilization comes from the Latin civis, meaning citizen. To be civilized was, originally, to be Roman. There is a question that historians and philosophers have argued about for centuries, and it is worth letting settle around you as this story ends. Why did Rome fall? There is no single answer. The historian Edward Gibbon, writing in the 18th century, listed the spread of Christianity and the loss of civic virtue. Later scholars pointed to climate change, volcanic eruptions in the 530s that cooled the entire northern hemisphere, triggering crop failures and famine. Others pointed to plagues, the Antonine plague of the 2nd century, the plague of Cyprian in the 3rd, the Justinianic plague of the 6th, all of them spreading through the roads and trade networks that had made Rome great in the first place. Others focused on economic collapse, political dysfunction, military overreach, the sheer impossibility of governing a territory that stretched from Scotland to Syria with the communication technology of the ancient world. The German historian Alexander Dement catalogued 210 different theories about the fall of Rome. 210. More have emerged since. The honest answer is that Rome fell for all of these reasons and for none of them entirely. That an empire 1,000 years old does not collapse for a single cause, but rather under the accumulated weight of everything that living in time eventually brings to all things. The miracle is not that Rome fell. The miracle is that it lasted as long as it did, that it built what it built, that it left what it left behind. Because it left us everything. You have spent some time with Rome tonight. Maybe you were awake for all of it. Maybe you drifted in and out. Maybe you are already half asleep, and Rome is settling somewhere quiet in your mind alongside all the other things that live there. That is how it is supposed to work. The gladiators and the emperors and the engineers and the centurions and the millions of ordinary people who lived and cooked and bathed and worked and died in the shadow of the empire. They don't require your full attention. They just ask to be remembered. And now, in some small way, they are. Let the stories unfold slowly. There is nothing to focus on, just knowledge finding its way in. If you want more quiet history like this, more stories of civilizations that shaped the world we live in, please subscribe to Forming Knowledge Quietly and leave a like so this kind of content can reach people who need it. Every subscription helps these stories keep finding their way to new ears.